Hey folks, welcome to the channel. I'm excited to work on this new build. This is going to be a keyhole dagger, meaning this entire blade and bolster area will be one piece and the handle will be press fit into it. So the only thing holding this together is the fitting between the wood and the steel. Of course, it's going to have some incredible mosaic damascus. Let's get at it. For the core of the pattern, we're going to start with 30 layers of damascus. We're going to weld that up and get it in the forge. Once the billet is at 2100 degrees Fahrenheit, we're going to give it a little touch in the hydraulic press. After a few heats, we'll have set the weld and we can manipulate this and draw it out into a thin bar. Since we'll be combining this with some other steel, we need it to be exactly 1.5 inches wide and 4 inches long. We'll actually have a little more, but we're going to save that piece for another project. Now we're going to start our final stack. We're going to take some 1084, which will be black, and then some alternating layers just to show a Damascus pattern. And then we're going to use some pure nickel, and then that Damascus we just forged, and then more pure nickel, and we're going to mirror it on the other side. This is going to give us a really cool pattern. And just like before, we're going to get it up to forge welding temperatures and squish it all together. Right now our layers are basically straight and flat. We need to give it a little more character, so the first thing we're going to do is knock in the corners and get prepared for the next step where we add some distortion. Here I'm continuing to knock in the corners, and I'm actually going to completely re-square the billet, and then I'll squish it down into a bar, and that's going to cause C's to form, and you'll see in an upcoming step what that looks like. Now we're just squishing this down into a bar so we can cut it up and then restack it. And here are the C's that I was talking about. Now again, we're going to forge weld this together into a solid brick, and then we're going to draw it out, cut it up, and restack it again. Here I'm using drawing dies, which are curved. They draw out the billet more lengthwise, instead of gaining as much width. Now we're flattening out that bar to get ready for that restack. And here it is. You can see it's starting to look more interesting. Once again, we're going to forge weld it together, draw it out in a bar, and restack it. Then we're going to do something interesting.
We've got this back into a bar. We're just flattening it out and getting ready for a restack. Here I've cut it up and restacked it again. Now we're forging it together, and then we're going to do something interesting. Now that the billet's all forge welded together, I'm going to knock in the corners a little bit, but then I'm going to turn it at about a 23-degree angle, and we're going to put S's into the billet. And you'll see in a minute what that does to the pattern. Now I'm rounding out the billet a little bit, and then I'm going to forge it at that 23-degree angle, and then put it back into a rectangular form. Now you can see what that distortion did. Now I'm going to stack them up and alternate them so it makes an S down the billet. As you can see, it's a little tricky forge welding this together because it wants to keep bowing. I ended up taking my little handle off just so I could manipulate it a little easier. Now it's time to start forging the dagger. I need to leave a big block at the end for the keyhole, but what I want to do now is just draw out the blade. Here I'm using my aggressive drawing dies just to keep drawing out the blade portion. It's starting to look close to what I want. We just need to draw out the tip a little bit, but I think we're really close. Now I spend a few minutes with the integral grinding attachment just to clean up the blade and the front of the bolster.
So I'm ready to think about the next steps on this dagger. So first thing is that I want to put little scallops here, but I don't want to grind them in because I don't want to grind into the pattern. So what I'm going to do is just heat it up in the induction forge and put it on the anvil and kind of hammer in with this on each side. So just kind of pinch it here. And the next is I need to start getting the hole, the space for the keyhole. And I don't, again, want to just remove all this Damascus. So what I'm going to do is make a cut here, heat it up with the induction forge, and then I'm going to drive a spike, whatever, a wedge through here just to spread this Damascus open. So you'll see more of the Damascus instead of me just removing all this material.
The induction forge is such a cool piece of equipment. Every time I use it, I feel like it's magic. Sorry about the bad camera angle here, folks.
So I've gone ahead and done a bit of the profile here and drawn on the keyhole. So now it's going to be a matter of grinding out this part of the keyhole. First we'll start with the hole.
This blade is actually going to have quillions that screw into each side of the bolster, so I figure I better do those first. Now I'm tapping that hole so that we have something to screw into. And now we'll move on to drilling the hole for the keyhole.
All right, managed to get the keyhole all done. Did this on the mill, actually turned out really good. And ground this clean. Now I think I'm going to heat treat this before I do any grinding.
With that big bolster retaining a lot of heat, I needed to make sure this cooled down enough. After this, it'll go in the oven at 400 degrees to temper for a while, and that'll make it a little tougher.
So I did a bunch of grinding on the flats just to get this clean. And I've created a really thin platen so that I can get inside here, because we need to put about a 1 degree bevel on this so that we can hammer the, press the wood in easily. So that's what we're going to do now. So I've selected a piece of African blackwood for this. Now I'm going to take just this modified pencil and I'm going to draw a line and then grind to that, that rough line.
I got a lot of help from Yako at JVB Knives and watching the video that he did on doing keyholes. So I'll put a link down in the video description. Go check him out.
Now I'm just going to press this in a little bit just to get a mark around it, and hopefully this works. That actually worked really well. So now I have the imprint, so I'm going to go and clean this up. I want to take some of this out before we get to the next step. Now we're going to microwave this for 10 to 30 seconds just to warm it up. Well, folks, there it is. I'd love to tell you that this went perfectly the first time, but it did not. So let me tell you about some of the issues that I had. Well, first off, I had put a 1 degree angle on here. The problem was when I pressed the wood in, this part here is so thin and there's so much pressure that it was spreading these apart. So every time I pressed it in, there was gaps here because this would press in and push these apart. So I ended up going back and taking out that 1 degree angle. And then instead of heating this up and heating this up separately, which seemed to take a long time, I actually just kind of heated this with a heat gun. Right before I pressed it in and as I was pressing it in. And that seemed to help me quite a bit. There was one tiny little gap in here which I was able just to fill with CA glue, and it might actually come out when I grind the outside. But you can see that it's rock solid. So, very happy with that. Now we can continue with shaping the handle, the profile, and then start to grind out all of these corners. I did a bunch of grinding on this. It's the blade is nice and straight and flat, and trimmed up the handle just a little bit and ground these the same. Now what I'm actually going to do is put this in the lathe on the 4-jaw chuck, because I actually want to turn the end, and I'll actually take the corners off this just with the lathe, because I'm going to do something funky on the end here. So let's go do that.
In case you were wondering, these are diamond files, not just regular files, because this is hardened steel now.
So I did a bunch of grinding and sanding on the handle. I'm very happy with it. It's pretty close. It needs to be just final sanding. Put little bevels here. And now we're ready to do the blade. I already went and just did these plunge lines with the 2-inch wheel, just so that these plunges are perfect. Now we're going to go do the bevels.
Now it's time to work on the pommel. This is going to be a spherical ball that fits into the end, and after this I do a bunch of quillions. I spent about 6 hours on the lathe, so I'm going to spare you most of that and show you after.
So I've hand sanded this up to 2000 grit, and we are ready to etch. But of course, before we etch this, we need to protect the wood somehow. So what we're going to do is use some nail polish and paint the wood. I stole this from my wife, don't tell her, but that's what we're going to do. So there it is, all nail polished up. I'll go wipe it off, clean it off with soapy water, and then this and this will go in the acid.
I want the pommel and the quillions to be black, so I'm using a special chemical salt here, and we're going to turn them black. After this, it's ready for assembly. You guys ready to see the final product?